Friends, members of the university, esteemed guests, a warm welcome to this, the first of our 2024 series of Gifford Lectures at the University of Aberdeen. My name is Paul Nimmo. I hold the King's Chair of Systematic Theology here and chair the Gifford Lectures Committee. The Gifford Lectures are named after the prominent Scottish advocate and judge, Lord Adam Gifford, who died in 1887. In his will, he provided for a series of lectures to be held at each of the four ancient Scottish universities, Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and St Andrews, with a view to promoting, advancing, teaching, and diffusing the study of natural theology in the widest sense of that term. Since 1888, the Gifford Lectures have become one of the most renowned public intellectual events anywhere in the world, in the fields of theology, philosophy, ethics, and religion. Here in Aberdeen, Gifford Lectures have been delivered by luminaries such as Karl Barth, Hannah Arendt, Richard Swinburne, Paul Tillich, Jaroslav Pelikan, Eleanor Stump, Sarah Coakley, Mona Siddiqui, and N.T. Wright. For the Gifford Lectures this spring of 2024, we are honoured and delighted to add a further distinguished name to our roster of Aberdeen Gifford Lecturers. Miri Rubin is Professor of Medieval and Early Modern History at Queen Mary University of London. She previously taught at the Universities of Cambridge and Oxford. She is a historian of Europe whose research has focused particularly on the exploration of themes in the religious cultures of Europe in the period 1100 to 1600. Her interests thus embrace a wide range of topics, including the history of religious cultures, social and community relations, urban life and attitudes to strangers, Jewish-Christian relations, gender identity and the body, and the visual and material expressions of ideas and practices. In line with these latter research interests, our current series of Gifford Lectures will include both a musical event in the King's College Chapel and a gallery event in the Aberdeen Art Gallery. Details are on the flyer before you. The many writings of Professor Rubin include Charity and Community in Medieval Cambridge, Corpus Christi, the Eucharist in Late Medieval Culture, Gentile Tales, the narrative assault on late medieval Jews, Mother of God, a history of the Virgin Mary, Emotion and Devotion, the meaning of Mary in medieval religious cultures, and Cities of Strangers, making lives in medieval Europe. She has also authored the very popular, accessible work, The Very Short Introduction to the Middle Ages, and she is a regular guest expert on radio and television. Professor Rubin, we are thrilled that in your busy schedule, you have been able to make time this spring to be present in Aberdeen to deliver a series of Gifford Lectures entitled The Feminine and the Religious Imagination. It is therefore with great pleasure that I invite you now to the podium to deliver your first Gifford Lecture entitled An Introduction and Considering the Necessity of the Feminine.
Good evening, and thank you so much for that introduction. I've been so looking forward to these Gifford lectures, and here they are. So, Adam Lord Gifford was an eminent lawyer and later an associate judge of the Court of Sessions in Edinburgh. Lord Gifford's religion was deeply felt as both a personal passion and an intellectual one. And since he was an avid reader, whose interests ranged really broadly, he was able to deliver lectures himself on a whole variety of religious experience in different faith traditions. This becomes evident from a glance at the themes of the lectures that he prepared between 1872 and 1880 for a variety of societies across Edinburgh. The topics ranged from the medieval mystic Bernard of Clairvaux to the 10 avatars of the god Vishnu. Unlike many of his generation and status, Lord Gifford was not an avid traveler, though he had traveled some in Europe. Yet he built up an impressive library that fed his voracious intellect. That is how he traveled across regions and religions while reflecting on the philosophies that underpin them. Lord Gifford was a man of the world. By founding the lectures we are here to celebrate, he hoped to bring into the public domain some of the extraordinary variety and ferment in thinking about religion that characterized his time. One might even say that he planted a built-in element of competition into the structure of the lectures by endowing them at the four proximate and ancient universities of Scotland, Aberdeen, St Andrews, Glasgow, and his own Edinburgh. Lord Gifford wished the lectures to address the loftiest of subjects, but in the most down-to-earth manner, as he explained in his will. I wish the lectures to treat their subject as a strictly natural science, the greatest of all possible sciences, indeed, in one sense, the only science, that of the infinite being, without reference to or reliance upon any supposed special, exceptional, or so-called miraculous revelation. I wish it considered just as astronomy or chemistry. And who did Lord Gifford hope might deliver such lectures? The lecturers appointed shall be subjected to no test of any kind, and shall not be required to take any oath, or to emit or subscribe any declaration of faith, or to make any promise of any kind. They may be of any denomination whatever, or of no denomination at all, and many earnest and high-minded men prefer to belong to no ecclesiastical denomination. They may be of any religion or way of thinking, or, as is sometimes said, they may be of no religion, or they may be so-called skeptics or agnostics or free thinkers. Anyone could be invited as long as they were able, reverent men, true thinkers, sincere lovers of and earnest inquirers after truth. That is, in Gifford's words. Just short of a century after Lord Gifford wrote those words, the patrons of the lectures, those charged with their successful delivery, decided that some, and I quote, able, reverent women may be called to the honor and the challenge of delivering the lectures. Hannah Arendt was invited to do so in 1972 and 1973. With their lofty subject matter and the rigorous application expected by the lecturers, who were the Gifford lectures meant to address? Here is Lord Gifford again. The lectures should be public and popular. That is, open not only to students of the universities, but to the whole community without matriculation, as I think that the subject should be studied and known by all, whether receiving university instruction or not. And my desire and hope is that these lectureships and lectures may promote and advance among all classes of the community the true knowledge of him. Given the intellectual ambition attached to the Gifford lectures and their clarity of purpose, Gifford lectures have felt, as I do, a need to explain their chosen subject and the approach they have adopted in writing about it. American philosopher and psychologist William James, perhaps the most renowned of Gifford lecturers and one to whom we shall return, described hearing when he was but a boy in a very scholarly household in New York that Lord Gifford had founded his lectureships. At the time, I did not think of being a teacher of philosophy, and what I listened to was as remote from my own life as if it related to the planet Mars. Yet here I am with the Gifford system part and parcel of my very self, and all my energies for the time being devoted to successfully identifying myself with it. When Hannah Arendt was preparing her Gifford lectures, she shared some trepidation with her audience. The title I have given this lecture series, The Life of the Mind, sounds pretentious, and to talk about thinking seems to me so presumptuous that I feel I should start less with an apology than with a justification. No justification, of course, is needed for the topic itself, especially not in the framework of eminence inherent in the Gifford lectures. What disturbs me is that I try my hand at it, for I have neither claim nor ambition to be a philosopher or to be numbered among what Kant, not without irony, called Denker von Gewerbe, that is, professional thinkers. No justification is required for my subject either. It is so obviously full of interest. The feminine in the religious imagination. Yet, like Arendt, I feel the need to say a few words about my choice. I am a historian of medieval and early modern religion, of religious life, of lived religion, of the contacts between religious cultures. I'm an historian who revels in the variety of traces the past has left us in all its richness, in written documents, in music, in visual forms, in the making of places for religious experience. All these are now the stuff of the historical consideration of religions past and present. Lord Gifford, his brother John tells us, was not much interested in the visual arts. Yet we will enjoy much visual stimulation in these lectures. But Lord Gifford was a passionate reader of poetry, and so much of what we will savor, not least the music, is written in the finest verse. As the great historian of medieval religion, Jacques Le Goff, put it, the historian is a sort of ogre, a monster, who devours all that smells of human experience. Digital technologies now make it easy to extend our contact with images and objects of past religious life, and we shall do so here. Historians are not only ogres when it comes to their sources, they are voracious in their search for enabling concepts and challenging methods. Such expansiveness is utterly necessary as we commence our exploration of our chosen topic, the feminine in the religious imagination. I've chosen this topic some 120 years after William James chose his own. James was first a medical researcher, then psychologist and philosopher, always at Harvard College, and he produced what has become perhaps the most renowned series of Gifford lectures. James delivered them in 1901 and 1902 in Edinburgh, while in a state of ill health. He died just a few years later. The lectures were published in 1902 as The Varieties of Religious Experience, A Study in Human Nature, a book that quickly became, and still is, extremely influential. The subtitle of his lectures, A Study in Human Nature, is highly significant here. For the aim of his lectures turned book was to understand religion as experience, rather than through its underlying philosophy or theology. James explained his approach in a letter to a friend. The problem I've set myself is a hard one. First, to defend experience against philosophy as being the real backbone of the world's religious life. And second, to make the hearer or reader believe what I myself invincibly do believe, that although the special manifestations of religion may have been absurd, I mean the creeds and the theories, yet the life of it as a whole is mankind's most important function. The religious experience in its multitude and difference was James's prey, and he approached it with the keen observation of a psychologist. Psychology was a young discipline at the time, and James's work led him to conduct clinical and experimental work in asylums. Those tools of observation and analysis he later turned to the better understanding of religion, even his own father's staunch Protestant faith. James sought not institutions, but people, not the high, but the demotic. In the preface to the book, he described his interest in man's religious appetites, that's a quote, and his first lecture explained that he would be dealing with, quote, human documents of those men who, like St. Francis or Oliver Cromwell, were most accomplished in the religious life and best able to give an intelligible account of their ideas and motives. He devoted several lectures to religious conversion, and at the heart of these inquiries were Jonathan Edwards and Leo Tolstoy. I have chosen my own capacious topic to fill, challenge, and enlighten our hours together over the next few weeks. So let me explain how I intend to progress. These lectures will communicate and analyze some of the meanings of the feminine as expressed in word, image, and sound in Christian cultures and over several centuries in Europe and beyond. Christianity is a set of cultures embedded in localities, influenced by what had come before them and shaped by new challenges over time. All this means that we will also deal with a lot more than the strictly Christian. We will perforce consider aspects of the ancient world, of Judaism, and of indigenous religions and areas of Christian conquest and mission. We will occasionally cast a comparative gaze onto other world religions, just as Lord Gifford himself did. We may well ask what I mean with the word feminine in my title. Here, the influences, answers, and possibilities are many. One to mention is that of Luce Irigaray, a French feminist theorist who saw and still sees the feminine as absence, as a being whose desire has had for very long no presence and representation in European cultures. The feminine is about touch, not gaze, about contact, not force, in what she calls a scopic economy that assigns to the feminine but a passive role. Men gaze, women are seen. Such theorizing was very influential in the later 20th century, since it offered a trenchant new language to speak the condition of women. It was perhaps a necessary first step towards challenging exclusion and forming the possibilities of the empowerment of women. But in the half-century that has passed since Irigaray wrote those words, a great deal has happened to thinking the feminine. The feminine is not one thing, but many. It is a cultural construct that affects women's lives, but which also represents and shapes aspects of nature, of masculinity, of science, and as I shall show, of religion too. An important contribution to the ways we think about the feminine arises from an attempt to get away from approaches like the one cited above that, and I quote, restricted the meaning of gender to receive notions of masculinity and femininity. These are the words of Judith Butler, the 2018 Gifford lecturer who delivered her series at the University of Glasgow. Butler's worry was that a dichotomous critique like that of Irigaray was bound to be exclusionary, as feminism ought never to be. Such dichotomy is likely to be homophobic, while also rejecting a whole array of possibilities of the feminine itself. Butler argues that gender roles are learned, though through the repeated rituals of normative life, and that these vary between cultures. But she also suggests that the body always knows aspects of the self for which society and language offer no rituals, offer no words. And so individuals express those unspoken tendencies in their daily lives and in ways that are not strictly feminine or masculine. What I hope to develop in these lectures is an exploratory account of how a certain idea of the feminine became central to Christian faith and so was promoted in a variety of ways at the heart of Christian cultures. How these procedures affected the lives of men and women will sometimes come through in unexpected and surprising ways. Above all, we will work to acknowledge the presence of the feminine and more, its necessity for Christian meaning. The feminine is thus created within cultures and across time. It is also specific to particular frames of knowledge. So, for example, medieval medical discourse saw in the feminine the less energized, the more damp and cold aspects of nature, which are present in some men, but are most regularly present in women. In religious discourse, women were associated with sin and lasciviousness. They are prone to temptation, and in turn, they tempt others, like the first woman was said to have done, Eve. Yet the feminine is also generative and reproductive. It delivers life itself. And even if modern medical theory understood the male sperm, if pre-modern medical theory, understood the male sperm to be the more powerful agent of generation and described the womb as but the vessel that contained the fetus, there was an abiding sense of the necessity of the feminine. This was repeatedly realized in Christian culture, as we shall see later in this lecture. Let us consider then the feminine not so much as a position, but as a tendency, as an orientation. Here I follow Sarah Ahmed's interesting idea of orientation, the leaning towards an object, the finding our place in the world where our bodies belong and where they may next go, always surrounded by things like clothes and tools of craft and weapons. We occupy a position, an embodied position in the world, yet one is not determined fully by the body or by social expectations. The feminine in Christian religious cultures offered opportunities for such orientation for both men and women, and these may be the position of the female pilgrim, the monk who identified with Mary's compassion at the foot of the cross, the mother teaching her children to pray, the abbot imagining himself as a mother. Such points of orientation were embedded in material things and were felt by emotion-laden bodies, humans. Hence, to say feminine is not to say woman or women alone. These lectures are not primarily about women's devotional practices or about female mystics, though we will encounter them along the way. Fortunately, we now know a great deal about female religious and about the religious practices of lay women too. This knowledge is now available to academics and wide publics in ways that Lord Gifford and William James would have found astounding, and I'd like to think of which they would have fully approved. Rather, these Gifford lectures will explore the affordances of the feminine, that which thinking the feminine yields, makes possible within communities, be they lay, monastic or clerical, male or female, urban or rural, European or not. This is an ambitious set of issues, as befits the Gifford lectures. It is not only the feminine that needs some explication before we continue, but religion, and the religious does too. Let us turn to William James again, for even he, at a time when his audience was probably more steeped in religious practices than we are today, felt it useful to explain the category of religion to his audience. Religion, therefore, as I now ask you arbitrarily to take it, shall mean for us the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, so far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. Since the relation may be either moral, physical, or ritual, it is evident that out of religion, in the sense in which we take it, theologies, philosophies, and ecclesiastical organizations may secondarily grow. Secondarily grow. I would probably want to emphasize even more explicitly the interrelationship between that experience of the inner person and the institutions that grow, that deliver ritual, instruction, music, architecture, and art. I see the experience of religion as more communal than James did, while also being so very personal. In that sense, I come closer to the definition of religious culture offered in an anthropological mood by Clifford Geertz in 1966. Religion is a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, pervasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations in men by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these conceptions with such an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. Working with this approach, we will seek to explore the work of the feminine in making those moods, in supporting a certain order of existence, and in bringing a certain aura of factuality, familiarity, to the religious experience. Pace James. Both James and Geertz then agree that religion helps humans contemplate the large questions, the meanings of life, the purpose of things, how we got here, and why our world, social relations, political arrangements, takes the shape it does. From these questions flow philosophies, theologies, and from them arise rituals and habits of body and mind. A whole series of actors, priests, teachers, canoners, mystics, manufacturers of devotional objects, women teaching their children at home, all contribute to the making of religion or of religious cultures by combining ideas and things and by organizing them in time and in place. I'm just going to take a sip of water. Complex dispositions and elaborate narratives make religious cultures. We shall dwell most particularly on those that developed in pre-modern Europe based on the rich heritage of early Christian antiquity. It is in the efforts of all these ages, official and unofficial, men and women, learned and unlearned, that the necessity of the feminine at the heart of Christianity was explored, realized, materialized, and lived. In doing so, this year's Gifford events will move between 3 venues in Aberdeen. Today we start here with this opening lecture. We will move on to the second lecture, which homes in on Virgin Mother Bride Queen, the Virgin Mary. We are then very, very fortunate to have the fantastic venue of the University Chapel, King's Chapel, for the concert that will be performed by the Aberdeen University choirs and that will convey already in the third lecture, as it were, the third event, looking back to some of the material we are speaking about today, and in the next lecture, but also looking forward. We are very fortunate to be able to combine this wonderful event in these Gifford lectures. We will then move on to the feminine as beloved in a particular allegorical uses of the feminine, and imagining the feminine as an allegory for church and for soul. Our fifth meeting will be at the Aberdeen Art Gallery, because the visual will have been so central to what we are studying here. We have the wonderful occasion, the really great privilege of actually seeing works of art in situ, in their place, and we're very, very grateful to the Aberdeen Art Gallery for hosting us. And finally, we will gather again on the 18th of March for our last lecture, which, after having developed themes around the feminine, we will in fact question some of our findings by considering categories beyond male and female. So we will use now the rest of this lecture to set the scene for the necessity of the feminine in Christian cultures in ways that far transcend the mere presence of female godlike figures in other religions. And I hope you'll return next week when we will be talking on the Virgin Mary and really homing in on the Christian experience. We will do all of this consideration in a very historically minded fashion, but one that is not strictly linear or chronological, because these are not strictly history lectures, but ones that call for reflection and experimentation. Hence, we will often situate side by side artifacts or texts for the power of comparison between them, for similarity or difference. Yet you will always be told where and when any of our sources was made and used and how. The challenge of writing these lectures has also been a liberation of sorts, and it has allowed me to develop a new perspective on questions and materials that I thought I knew well. So if considering the feminine is not the same as discussing women, what is it then? As I said, I shall treat the feminine as a category of knowledge, one that enables thinking and acting in particular ways. The feminine arises from ideas about the protean difference between women and men, ideas that have across centuries and cultures privileged men in many ways. Yet for all that such thinking has sought to distinguish between the qualities that pertain to men and those pertaining to women, to associate men and male qualities with authority and reason, and women with generation and care, the feminine remains central to much religious thought produced by men. We will find in these Gifford lectures that the feminine is invoked at profound junctures in reflection on religion. Just as Jews thought it useful to reflect on God's presence as the feminine Shekhinah, so were ecclesia, church, and anima, the soul, imagined as feminine. In these lectures, we will probe the feminine in the religious imagination across centuries and regions of Christian traditions. But the feminine is familiar in other faith traditions too. Let us look at the Hindu tradition, whose earliest texts, hymns of praise of the Vedic corpus, address in particular the three male deities, Agni, Soma, and Indra, as well as lesser female deities. Of all the female deities, none but one, Usha, comes even close to the male deities. She is associated with dawn and hence with light. At every dawn she renews light and life, and is even able to drive demons away. She is not at the core of the Rig Veda, the oldest Vedic text, but has a distinctive character, the power of light, of marking time, of seeing keenly, and hence hunting well. She is also praised for her breasts full of nectar. Here, around the year 400 of the Common Era, are aspects of the feminine within the Hindu religious tradition that remind us of what we will find as we move into the Christian one. What is less familiar from the Christian tradition, though, is a female presence like Kali, who first occurs around 600, associated with violence and destruction. She is depicted as black and in disarray, with wild hair and wearing her dead trophies as earrings. She was worshipped by social outcasts and in areas of marginal settlement. She was born in the Himalayas, after all. Everything about her was unsettling, and the fascination she inspired led to a rich written tradition about her adventures. A song by the Bengali poet Ram Prasad makes her unsettling qualities really clear. Men call you merciful, but there is no trace of mercy in you, mother. You have cut off the heads of the children of others, and these you wear as a garland around your neck. It matters not how much I call you mother, mother. You hear me, but you will not listen. A mother who does not answer. Can anything be more terrifying? Hinduism also produced Buddhism that spread wide and went on to affect the feminine content of other world religions. This is particularly striking when we consider how Avalokiteshvara, a handsome young prince god, was exported from India through Central Asia and ultimately to China. Mahayana Buddhism was implanted in China, where Avalokiteshvara was often depicted with 1,000 arms and described as the hearer of sounds. He was translated into Chinese as Guanyin. Guanyin was a bodhisattva, a striver towards Buddhahood. By the 9th century, Guanyin had become a female goddess, and later in Japan, she became the goddess Kannon. Guanyin attracted wide popular veneration as legends abounded about her commitment to virginity against her family's wishes. She was best known from the 12th century as the Princess Miao Shan, whose tribulations are not unlike those of medieval European female saints and martyrs. Guanyin was venerated by all, but especially by women. Her introduction to China may have replaced local female deities like dragon ladies and rain maidens. She reminds us of Mary in that it was claimed that no one could refuse her wishes. She reminds us of Mary, but is also unlike Mary in being headstrong, and she fought against her father, the king, who wanted his daughters to marry and bear heirs. But she ultimately won him over, since she was able to cure him of a deadly disease. To give you the sense of this female presence, listen to her berate her father. If you cannot control your family, how can you control the nation? If you are a son of heavens and an emperor of men in possession of the way, how would you, a father, ever think of entering this side palace at night in the third watch and urge your daughter to marry a husband? How would it look if the world came to know of this? So the popularity of Avalokiteshvara grew in China with his transformation into a female figure, a young and virtuous princess. The texts that have survived since the 12th century, the precious scroll of Incense Mountain, were written and rewritten by monks, but were widely read and known to women too. Like the Christian lives of saints, here too the life of an exemplary woman was seen as a powerful teaching aid. The preface to the precious scroll makes this clear in an imagined dialogue. The master asked the monk, "By what method should I deliver the people?" The monk replied, "I notice that the people of this land have a karmic affinity with the Bodhisattva Guanxin. Tell them in brief the outline of the career of the Bodhisattva, so it will circulate throughout the world. The blessing of those who venerate her and recite her name will be unassailable." So the feminine here is deployed as exemplary, yet it inhabits a subordinate position in a divine gendered hierarchy. These examples cast into relief, shed light by comparison on the feminine Christian religious cultures to which I now turn. The feminine is located at the center of Christian thought and feeling. At the heart of the Christian story is the incarnation, the novel idea of a God made man, a God made flesh, yet both God and man. God was born of a virgin, conceived by the Holy Spirit, who had always dwelt alongside him and his heavenly Father, or within the Trinity. Now, the world in which Christianity emerged knew unusual births of gods. Suffice it to think of the Greek and Roman deities with their complex conjugal and familial relations. But in Judea, something different was born. The incarnation secured the claim that God offered himself, humbled himself by the assumption of human flesh and by living among humans. This idea was captured in the creed read out at the Council of Constantinople in 381. And in one Lord Jesus Christ, the one begotten Son of God, begotten from the Father before all ages, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of one substance with the Father, through whom all things came into their existence, who because of us men and because of our salvation came down from heaven and was incarnate from the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary and became man. The incarnation was a novel claim, yet one deeply rooted in the prophecies of the Hebrew Bible. Hence, both Matthew and Luke introduced Jesus by supplying his genealogy back to the house of David, from which the Messiah was to be born according to the Hebrew prophets. In this manner, Jesus was presented to the Jews as the fulfillment of their own expectations, for not all Jews accepted that view and became Jesus' followers. By the 12th century, it was customary to represent this genealogy as a tree whose root was planted in the body of Jesse, King David's father. But as we see here, in this wonderful Lambeth Bible made in Kent around 1140, the tree is made of Mary's body herself. Christ's genealogy is condensed here into Mary's own body. All the generations passed through her, captured in her long and elegant form. No birth could be imagined without a mother. Here is but one of the ways the generative feminine asserted itself in the work of Christian creative hands and minds. The incarnate religion promised what no other religion had done before. It offered God, God made flesh, but also elicited a process of incorporation in its adherents. It not only told a story about the past, but it realized that past in the here and now through ritual. The promise of God's body was foretold in the Last Supper, remembered in the early church in communal meals of bread and wine in communities around the Mediterranean. Following Luke, of course. And he took bread, gave thanks and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Likewise, he also took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you." The Passover meal became a recurrent reality in Christian ritual, the Eucharist. But what was it really? A promise? A commemoration? A reenactment? Centuries of theological effort aimed to figure out the underlying logic and the related liturgical design and pastoral teachings required to elucidate its meanings to believers. From about the 9th century, and initially within monastic circles, those words of promise were rearranged and audaciously imagined as a feast on God's body. Even two monks of a single monastery, Ratramnus and Pascasius of Corbie, an abbey not far from Amiens in the very north of France, were able to disagree on what the consecrated bread and wine really meant. Pascasius argued that they became the real historic flesh and blood of Christ, that which was crucified and then resurrected. Ratramnus argued that they were sign and memory of those events. Paschasius's view eventually prevailed in the Church's formulations. By 1215, belief in transubstantiation became an article of faith, that is, the belief that Christ was present under the appearance of bread and wine after their consecration by a priest. So Christ was born at every altar, daily. All this coalesced into a powerful and powerfully conceived ritual, the sacrament of the altar, delivered by a priest whose touch and voice and gesture turned bread and wine into flesh and blood, the very Corpus Christi. Much was done to envelop Christ's body in dignity and safety. It was to be handled only by priest. It was to be used at the altar only kept in vessels made of precious metals. And after the service, it was to be stored in safe places under key. The space around the altar was illuminated by special lights and often was protected by curtains from drafts, as you see right there. But for all this setting of boundaries, for all this care within a masculine zone, Christ's body inspired thought and fantasies, worries and questions that went far beyond the ordered historic narrative that was taught, preached, and visualized. Offering the incarnate God in this manner, born of a woman, like every believer, came at a cost. The cost was the presence of the feminine body in such close proximity to the holy. This presence could trigger associations that were disturbing, even undermining of faith. Let us listen to how one woman from a village in the Pyrenees in the early 14th century, Auda Faura, described her experience. One day, as she was going to the Church of the Holy Cross to hear Mass, she heard some women, she does not recall their name, saying that a woman had given birth on the roadside in the village of Miri. She could not reach a homestead in time. Hearing this, she, that is Auda, thought of the disgusting afterbirth that women expel in childbearing, and whenever she saw the body of the Lord raised at the altar, she kept thinking, because of the afterbirth, that the host was something polluted. That's why she could no longer believe it was the body of Christ. Now, this is a testimony recorded when Auda Faura was investigated by the court of the Bishop of Pamiers as a sort of inquisitorial court that worked in those parts of Languedoc between 1314 and 1320 in pursuit of the remnants of heretical beliefs, mostly those of a dualist Catharism that had been always a subject of persecution, well, since the 12th century. Now, Auda was interrogated because she had expressed doubt and even error about the Eucharist. Comments reported by her live-in aunt, reported to the bishop's court, that is. Auda's words were taken down by the clerk in Latin, with some citation of words in the original Occitan. But for our purposes, what is important here, these translated words, even they offer a rare glimpse into the occurrence of the feminine. Christ the newborn was imagined by Auda as coming out of a woman's natural body, just like Auda's own, just like the woman who gave birth on the roadside. And given the prevailing attitudes to women's bodies and the belief in the polluted nature of their wombs, let alone the placenta, that dirty afterbirth, as she says, how could Auda believe that God was thus born and thus sullied? Her sensibility must also have been affected by the ideas held so widely in her region, the legacy of those so-called Cathars who believed the flesh to be so low, hence utterly unable to contain the sacred. Women like Auda inhabited a vernacular world, a world experienced and expressed in a language that was local. People learned religion at home, and usually from women, from mothers and sisters and aunts and grandmothers and domestic workers. The great Tuscan poet Dante Alighieri praised the common language in his tract De Vulgari Eloquentia, when he says, "For nature allows it not only to men, but even to women and children. It is the language that, and I quote, children gather from those around them, from the feminine milieu of home and nurture." Latin was firmly associated with the masculine, with high study, with authority, office holding. Latin was the language of theology and law and of large parts of the liturgy. Yet the vernaculars, the domestic, feminine languages, were sometimes the preferred ones, even by proficient Latin writers, when they chose to write about their devotional feelings. Hence the rich world of carols, of devotional chant, of personal prayer, all in the vernacular. At the center of Christianity was the Incarnation, and it brought a child and a mother to the fore. It made the feminine ever present, and this presence was productive of often unexpected orientations, as we have just seen from Auda's own lips. Lord Gifford indeed lived through a time of change, the middle decades of the 19th century, a time that saw profound transformation in the emphases of the Protestant sensibilities around him. This change involved several leading Scottish theologians whose work he knew. It has been called by Boyd Hilton in his important book, The Age of Atonement, a move towards a new emphasis on Jesus as man rather than as lamb. Scottish clergyman John Penrose, who died in 1859, described Christ in his Of God or of the Divine Mind of 1849 as, and I quote, "that human character in which is incorporated the full perfection of every human virtue and power." This incarnational theology followed the what Boyd Hilton calls the Age of Atonement, with its evangelical emphasis on sin and on the need for repentance, an emphasis that encouraged fear and wrath. This new Victorian Protestant Christianity considered Christ's moral example based on the belief, and I quote, that bodies as well as souls are dear to the God who made them. The new incarnational emphasis carried an important political message in Lord Gifford's lifetime. John Perry reminds us that this incarnational Christianity encouraged the acceptance of family and marriage. It saw the body as the temple of the living God, encouraged mutual obligation and care for those who were poor, simple, struggling, earthbound. This led Christians to preach and talk to working class audiences just like Gifford did. It did more, for it led to the creation of social justice movements interested in women, like the Church League for Women's Suffrage. Lord Gifford was no doubt alive to these debates, and everything I know about him suggests he would have taken the incarnational side. Hence, I hope he would have approved of the step he would approve of the step we will take next in our next lecture to explore the figure that arose, utterly necessary, from that incarnation, the Virgin Mary. Thank you so much.